Today we discover a story where a quiet life is shattered by an extraordinary secret. Samuel Washington, a humble hospital worker, loses his beloved wife Lorraine, only to find she's left behind not just memories, but a hidden fortune meant to change the world. Shock turns to courage as Samuel faces elite families, social prejudice, and the pressures surrounding his son's high-stakes wedding. In a breathtaking moment, dignity triumphs over wealth, reshaping relationships and forging an unforgettable legacy. Lorraine's fortune becomes a force for good, sparking a foundation that lifts children and unites communities. Grief gives way to hope as ordinary routines transform into lifelong impact, and one small family's love ripples through an entire city. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? What would you do if your own mother became someone you hardly recognized, a distant figure you once loved fiercely, who sacrificed everything for you, only to find herself alone, unseen, undervalued? Let this question pull you in. You might not know Dorothy Dion herself, but in her story, you might find traces of your own mother, or even yourself. Picture the American South in 1952, Birmingham, Alabama, thick with humidity, the smell of iron and coal always in the air. Dorothy's first breath was heavy with the weight of a world that had already decided who she could become. Born black, born poor, her path set before she ever opened her eyes. Her universe was small but vibrant, painted by her father's sweat and her mother's aching hands. Both parents wore hardship as if it were a second skin. Dorothy's father toiled endless double shifts at the steel mill. Each breath he took was a little heavier, cluttered with the dust and fumes that eventually claimed his lungs. Her mother, equally unbreakable, scoured rich folks' homes, knelt on floors that never belonged to her, scrubbing away other people's filth, until her own knees gave way beneath her. In their house, love was not offered in grand gestures or shiny presents, but in the silent currency of self-sacrifice and devotion, the kind that puts food on the table and warmth in the belly, even when neither seems possible. Dorothy watched and learned. Before most kids fully understood what sacrifice meant, she had already internalized it. To love meant to give until you couldn't give anymore. By the time she was 17 years old, Dorothy found herself standing at the edge of adulthood with a belly rounded by new life, her first child, Jamar, growing inside her. When she shared the news with her boyfriend, he vanished, evaporating from her life faster than smoke drifting through a window pane. 2 years later, Darija was born, and at only 19, Dorothy was alone with 2 small children and a mountain of responsibility. Bills became a constant source of anxiety. They grew and multiplied like shadows at sunset. But from her parents, Dorothy had inherited more than struggle. Inside her was something forged in fire, a spirit that would not bend, that would not break. Dorothy could have surrendered to despair, but instead she transformed her pain into a ferocious kind of love, undefeated by circumstance. Every decision was shaped by her children's well-being. The world outside their porch was stark. Racism was a daily threat. Opportunities were few, and poverty's grip was merciless. But what people didn't see was the fortress of hope Dorothy tried to build inside that small, drafty apartment. What choice did she have? With childcare unaffordable and family unable to help, she devised plans that wrung every drop of value from each day. Nights were spent cleaning downtown offices. To save a precious dollar, Dorothy walked 4 miles in both directions. Every step was a calculation. Bus fare or a loaf of bread, warm milk for the babies, or something as small and selfish as rest. By day, Dorothy's house became a sanctuary for other people's children. She babysat for the few neighbors O could pay, her own kids playing quietly in the corner. They understood, in the ways only poor children do, that some dreams had to be folded up and saved for later. There was not much room for childhood. Survival made its own demands. Yet, Dorothy filled the cracks in their world with tiny acts of grace. "Mama, why can't we have new shoes like the other kids?" Derasia asked one bright morning, looking sadly at the sneakers held together by duct tape and silent prayers. Dorothy didn't miss a beat. She knelt before her daughter, pulled out a black marker, and traced delicate flowers along the canvas. "These shoes are the prettiest in the school now, baby," she smiled, transforming shame into pride. That was Dorothy, the magician who spun pain into beauty, scarcity into abundance for those she loved. The challenges Dorothy faced might have broken another woman, but for her, adversity was just part of the music to which she danced. Every day began before dawn. She shook herself awake at 4 a.m., fixing breakfast when sleep called to her like a lullaby she could never afford to answer. Oatmeal, sometimes eggs, always something warm, something that said, "I love you," louder than any words could. After returning from her night job, she pressed Jamar's and Deresia's wrinkled clothes with fierce intention. Even if they were hand-me-downs, scavenged from church donation bins. Her fingers almost never rested. When she wasn't honing them into tools for survival, she used them to sew, mend, or braid. Always creating, always repairing. Even as weariness gnawed at her bones, she invented rituals of dignity and joy. Lessons bloom. When Jamar, at 8, came home with fire in his eyes, embarrassed by his no-frills peanut butter sandwiches while other children paraded sandwiches packed with extras, Dorothy set aside the shirt she was mending and held him close. "Baby, rich folks might have money, but we've got each other. That's a kind of wealth they can't ever buy." But it was a lesson he was too young to understand. Children calculate wealth in sneakers, bicycles, and cafeteria lunches, not in the quiet power of a mother's embrace. Still, Dorothy persisted. She took side jobs, laundry, hair braiding, anything that kept their heads above water. Some nights, sleep claimed her right at the kitchen table, face pressed against someone's homework she'd been helping with. It didn't matter. Education, she believed, was the only thing that could rewrite their story. Winter always felt sharper in Dorothy's world. Their apartment's thin walls let in every icy draft, and the heater coughed in spurts, a gruff, unreliable companion against the cold. Dorothy layered every scrap blanket she owned atop her children, her own body left to battle the chill alone. She'd sleep on the tired living room sofa in nothing but an old coat, telling her baby she preferred it, never admitting it was the only way to keep them warm. Dereja, only 10, caught on one morning. "Mama, you're shivering." Dorothy's smile was a lifeline. "I ain't shiverin', sweetheart. I'm just dancin' to music only I can hear." With a little jig, she made her children giggle, disguising the truth behind those moments. Some sacrifices are so quiet, no one but God and a devoted mother ever sees them. There were nights Dorothy went to bed hungry, just so her children could have seconds. She'd turn up the radio to drown out her stomach's protest, dancing and singing gospel songs, an anthem of hope bigger than their circumstances. And even as exhaustion took its toll, even as her body wore thin and aches settled in her joints, Dorothy never stopped moving forward. Each day, she built a tiny legacy out of resilience. Every meal prepared, every sock mended, every cheerful good morning whispered in the face of adversity was a quiet rebellion, a declaration that she and her children would overcome. When Jamar turned 12 and Dereja 10, Dorothy added a second cleaning shift, this time at the local hospital. Now her world blurred between night and day, work and home, leaving her with barely 4 hours of sleep in any given stretch. Neighbors watched her hustle with quiet awe and whispered among themselves, "That Dorothy Dion is going to work herself into an early grave." Behind their words lingered another message. Her children should know their place, should learn that dreams had boundaries folks like them shouldn't cross. Dorothy, however, refused to let someone else draw the borders of her children's future. Every spare dollar, every crumpled bill was dropped into an old coffee can labeled optimistically education. She hid it behind a dusty flour tin in her kitchen cupboard, daring to believe that hard labor today could blossom into opportunity tomorrow. When Jamar was accepted into the school's gifted program, Dorothy wept, tears of fierce, fragile joy, not sadness. When Dereja landed on the honor roll for a third consecutive year, Dorothy scraped together enough for a used typewriter from the thrift shop, wanting her daughter to put all her dreams on paper. She braided Dereja's hair at night, helped Jamar with his math, and whispered, "One day you'll be someone special in this world. All I ask is you remember your mama." Yet with new opportunities came new costs. Jamar dreamed of playing basketball, but the price for team fees and equipment was impossibly steep. Never one to back down from a challenge, Dorothy found a third job, scrubbing the homes of wealthy families across town. She poured her energy, her very soul, into her children, building brick by brick a bridge for them to cross over hardships she'd had to wade through alone. Lessons bloom. Time pressed forward, marked not by vacations or idle weekends, but by the milestones Dorothy managed to carve out despite her hardships. She made every birthday a celebration, a homemade cake from scratch, a single candle, songs sung a little off-key, but full of love. For Dorothy, these were sacred rituals. She knew her children felt the pangs of want, saw in their eyes the silent questions, the longing when other kids at school spoke about holidays at the beach or new bikes at Christmas. But she also knew she was teaching them that love was not measured in material things. Her words became a shield for their hearts. We can't always have what we want, but we make what we have enough. When Jamar confessed how he felt ashamed for not having brand new school supplies at the start of every year, Dorothy made a point to take him and Doricia on a special shopping trip to the local church charity drive. She had a way of making the plainest pencil seem precious, turning it over in her hand, declaring it lucky, and telling a funny story as she handed it to her son. Jamar learned to see the value in small things and in the resilience to laugh in the face of adversity. When Doricia's class held a Parent Appreciation Day, Dorothy sewed her a dress of yellow cotton, cut down from an old curtain. Doricia twirled before the mirror, beaming. That afternoon, as Dorothy sat among the other mothers, her back straight, her head high, she realized the true reach of her love. Lessons bloom. Doricia's friends flocked to her, drawn in by the warmth and light Dorothy radiated. Wherever Dorothy went, she brought wisdom earned the hard way, and dignity gathered like wildflowers she pressed between the pages of her family's story. School was more than an education for Dorothy's children. It was a battlefield. Every day, Doricia and Jamar faced obstacles their classmates would never know. Whispers about their hand-me-down clothes, the sting of prejudice, the quiet humiliation of lunch programs and forms marked free or reduced. Dorothy handled it with grace, empowering her children not to shrink in front of judgment, but to find their voices and stand tall. She instilled in Jamar an athlete's heart and a scholar's mind, and when he faltered, reminded him that every champion starts at the bottom. When Doricia was left out of a birthday party, Dorothy helped her write a letter, graceful, mature beyond her years, to the girl who'd snubbed her. Lessons bloom. It wasn't just about making her feel better. Dorothy taught her daughter the discipline of forgiveness, the strength to meet cruelty with dignity. She was careful never to let bitterness take root. She wanted her children to rise, not in opposition to the world, but in proof that goodness could persist in spite of it. At home, the family made their own sanctuary. Dorothy would cook Sunday dinners even on a Tuesday, using whatever she had: beans, greens, biscuits from scratch. They would gather around an old radio, listening to music, letting the sounds wash away the struggles of the day. Jamar learned to play the harmonica, encouraging bursts of laughter with his offbeat melodies. Every small victory, a good grade, a compliment from a teacher, was celebrated, as if each step forward was a miracle. The door to hope was always unlocked in Dorothy's house. But the nights stretched long and hard, especially after Dorothy's body started to betray her. The endless shifts, years of work with no rest, began to take their toll. She hid the pain at first, a dull ache in her back, swelling in her hands. But there were days she could barely stand, her legs trembling with the effort it took to simply keep going. The neighbors worried when they saw her slow down, and for the first time, Dorothy let someone help. Ms. 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 Evelyn, an elderly neighbor who had once relied on Dorothy to watch her grandchildren, arrived one morning with a pot of rich stew and a gentle hand. Dorothy cried to her in the privacy of her small kitchen, silent tears born of exhaustion and relief. It was a rare moment of vulnerability. Ms. Evelyn whispered, "Let others give to you too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Dorothy promised to rest, but in truth, she only slowed her steps for a moment, then poured all her remaining energy into her children's future. When hospital bills arrived for the pain she could no longer ignore, Dorothy was terrified. With dogged determination, she negotiated each payment, refusing to let debt swallow her hopes. Jamar took up after-school work, bagging groceries, breaking down boxes, just as his mother did for others all those years. Darisha volunteered at the library, determined to do her part. Their once playful innocence matured into deep loyalty for the woman who gave them everything. A pivotal change came as Jamar entered high school. His basketball coach recognized something special and took him under his wing, helping him apply for scholarships. For the first time, a path out of poverty glimmered just ahead. The family celebrated quietly. Dorothy baked sweet potato pie, humming gospel under her breath, while Jamar shared stories about practice and college dreams at their cramped kitchen table. But Dorothy's health continued its decline. Some days her pain was so bad she simply watched her children, her pride etched in the lines of her tired face. Still, she summoned the resolve to attend every game, cheering louder than anyone else, her voice hoarse but full of hope. When Derasia was accepted into a summer program for gifted writers, Dorothy's pride bubbled over. She pressed her daughter's acceptance letter to her heart, tears in her eyes. "You are everything I ever wanted for you," she whispered. Dorothy's sacrifices had become the invisible scaffolding for her children's achievements. Even as she worried about how they would pay for the next step, even as her body rebelled, her spirit remained unbroken. They began together to dream not just of survival, but of changing the trajectory of their family forever. Lessons bloom. One warm night, the siblings sat beside Dorothy on the worn porch, stars winking through the humid Alabama night. "Mama," Jamar asked, his voice uncertain, "are you scared for us?" Dorothy smiled softly, her gaze tracing constellations overhead. "No, baby, not for you. I'm scared this world won't know just how bright you both shine, because it's not always fair. But don't you be afraid to take that shine wherever you go." That night, the Dion family held hands, promising to lift each other higher, to honor every sacrifice Dorothy had made in silence and sweat. Every struggle, every lesson of their childhood had shaped them into something unbreakable. The day Jamar received his college acceptance letter, a full scholarship in hand, Dorothy wept openly. She clutched him so tight, afraid if she let go, the world might steal him away. Doricia brimmed with joy, vowing to keep writing, determined to one day speak for women like her mother. Dorothy's tiny apartment was suddenly filled with dreams that, at last, had room to grow. The family's endurance became their legacy, a story not of what they lacked, but of the love and hope that against all odds carried them forward. Years passed, marked by the rhythm of school terms, holidays, and birthdays, as childhood slowly gave way to adulthood in the Dion family. The day Jamar packed his single duffel bag and prepared to leave for college was both an ending and a beginning. Dorothy spent the night before quietly folding his clothes, her hands moving slowly, caressing each shirt as if to imprint her love into its fabric. She wanted desperately for her son to be ready, to trust that all she had taught would guide him through the challenges ahead. But as dawn broke and Jamar hugged her goodbye, she clung to him fiercely. The apartment felt emptier without his presence, his laughter, his hopeful dreams, the determined way he spoke about changing the world. Yet Dorothy refused to let loss define her home. She gathered every loving memory and wove it into Doricia's days, encouraging her daughter to study, write, and dream boldly. It was not easy. With Jamar gone, the apartment was quieter, but worries seemed louder. The small financial help he sent home from his campus job was precious, but never enough to cover Dorothy's mounting medical bills and everyday expenses. Nevertheless, she persisted, working when she could, borrowing less, and allowing herself small moments of rest. Derasia stepped up with a new confidence, pouring her energy into school and her writing. She submitted stories to local magazines, often writing about powerful, quiet mothers who held families together despite impossible odds. Dorothy read every line with pride, tears streaming down her face, hearing the echoes of her own struggles in her daughter's voice. During Jamar's first year of college, Dorothy's health hit another low point. She spent days in bed, her body racked by pain she could no longer hide. Doricia managed the household, cooked, cleaned, and found part-time work at a neighborhood thrift shop. The new routine was hard, but Dorothy's guidance, given in whispered advice and gentle corrections, made all the difference. Sometimes Dorothy's friends and neighbors pitched in. Miss Evelyn still appeared with food and encouragement, and the church sent volunteers to help with repairs in the apartment. Sometimes Dorothy's friends and neighbors pitched in. Dorothy's pride struggled against her gratitude, but she accepted their help with as much grace as she could muster. Community, she learned, was not shameful. It was a lifeline, just as strong as the family she'd built. Even through illness, Dorothy remained the guiding light in Doria's life. On the nights that pain kept her awake, she listened to her daughter read aloud, stories about adventure, courage, and hope set worlds apart from their own. Dorothy's heart soared with every sentence, knowing her children were discovering new possibilities. Lessons bloom. Sometimes she would smile and remind Doricia, "Never let anyone tell you what you can't write, baby. Your stories can go places we've never dreamed." In sharing her soul with her daughter, Dorothy kept the fire of hope burning, especially as Jamar's letters from college filled their mailbox with news. Good grades, a new group of friends, and dreams of returning home to uplift their community. Back in Birmingham, old friends and neighbors marveled at how the Dion children flourished, even as their mother's health faded. Derasia became known as the girl with her nose always in a book, scribbling furiously in her journal, hoping one day to write something so important people would read it and see her mother's quiet heroism. At church, she gave speeches about gratitude and determination, never forgetting where she came from. When Jamar returned at Thanksgiving, the apartment was crowded with laughter, music, and the delicious scent of Dorothy's sweet potato pie. He shared stories about his classes, basketball games, and dreams for the future, listening as his mother offered gentle advice from her bed. That holiday, Dorothy made a point to ask her children about their burdens and their joys, wanting them to know they could trust her with everything. "Promise me you'll keep caring for each other," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The world can be cold, but our love, this family, is the shelter you'll need to weather every storm." Jamar and Derasia knelt beside her, holding her hands, swearing they would honor the sacrifices she'd made and always look after each other. The traditions Dorothy created would echo in their lives forever, a blueprint for resilience passed from mother to child. As winter returned, Dorothy's condition declined sharply. Even simple tasks required help, and old aches gave way to new pains she could barely describe. But Dorothy's legacy was already taking root. Deresia's writing won a local award, and Jamar began volunteering at a youth center, tutoring kids from the neighborhood. Their success was not measured in trophies, but in the capacity to give back, to build hope where so many felt hopeless. Derasia wrote a special essay about her mother's sacrifices that was published in the city paper. Reading it, strangers reached out to Dorothy, sending letters filled with gratitude and admiration for her strength. One letter came from a woman across town who wrote, "Your story reminds me to hug my own children tighter. Thank you for lighting a way through darkness." Dorothy's tears mixed grief and pride. She understood finally that her life, though marked by hardship and invisibility, had inspired others. For a brief moment, the burdens she had carried lightened, replaced by the knowledge that her struggle had meaning beyond her apartment's walls. Derasia realized through her own words how deeply her mother was woven into the fabric of their community. Jamar saw that his ambitions for a better world depended on honoring his mother's story and carrying it forward. In her final months, Dorothy found herself surrounded by love, a chorus of voices she had preserved through years of sacrifice. Neighbors visited, sharing meals and laughter, recounting memories of Dorothy's gentle wisdom and quiet smile. Jamar, soon to graduate, came home often, bringing friends who were awed by the resilience of the Dion family. One day, Derasia surprised her mother with a self-published collection of her stories, each one a tribute to women like Dorothy, whose heroism shines even in silence. On a bright spring morning, Dorothy watched sunlight spill across the kitchen table, feeling for the first time in years a peace she'd almost forgotten. Her home, though modest, was vibrant, a gallery of hopes realized, a place where love had conquered hardship. Late that afternoon, she told her children, "Your future is written not by what the world gave you, but by what you dared to give back. I only ever wanted you to love bravely." That night, Derasia wrapped her arms around Dorothy, and Jamar rested his head on his mother's shoulder, their tears mingling in quiet gratitude. They knew, as she did, that her legacy was unbreakable. Dorothy's last weeks were marked by a quiet, almost sacred intimacy within their small apartment. The routines that had once been centered around survival were now transformed into rituals of love and remembrance. Derasia brought tea to Dorothy's bedside every morning, sitting with her and reading aloud from her growing stack of short stories and letters. She turned the bedroom into a garden of paper flowers, carefully hand-folded and colored with gentle pastels, each one inscribed with a memory or a wish for the future. "These will never wilt, Mama," she'd say, pinning one near Dorothy's pillow. "Just like the love you gave us." Jamar was no longer just a boy chasing a dream. He had become a young man grounded in gratitude and resolve. He spent late nights at his mother's side, telling her about his plans after graduation, a desire to return and serve the very community that had raised him, perhaps through teaching or social work. Dorothy, though tired, beamed with pride, seeing in her son the fulfillment of sacrifices that had, for so long, gone unnoticed by the world at large. She often reminded him that sometimes the best leaders are those who've struggled the most, because they know the cost of hope. Neighbors visited in a constant stream, each bringing food, stories, or simply the comfort of their presence. Old friends from the church choir came by, filling the air with the strains of spirituals Dorothy had loved as a young woman. She would close her eyes, letting their voices carry her back to happier, simpler times, the shared laughter on summer evenings, the sacred hush before dawn when she'd sit alone, gathering her strength for another hard-won day. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained luminous, a beacon not just to her family, but to the neighborhood that had watched her persevere for decades. As spring deepened, Dorothy's world narrowed to the essential. The past seemed to swirl and settle around her, a montage of tender moments, heartbreaks, and small bright victories. Even as her hands grew too frail to sew or braid, Dorothy continued to comfort her children, her words gentle but fierce. One evening, as dusk painted gold through the window. She called them both close. "I know for many years I wasn't able to give you what others had," she began, her voice soft but unwavering. "But what I gave from the soul. You must promise me, never measure your worth by anyone else's standards. And always lift someone else as you climb." Darija held her mother's hand, nodding solemnly, her heart aching with both sorrow and gratitude. Jamar, choked by emotion, squeezed Dorothy's shoulder, promising not only to care for his sister, but to honor Dorothy by living a life of service, just as she had taught. Dorothy blessed them both in the old way, forehead kisses and whispered prayers, an inheritance as enduring as gold. As Dorothy slept more often, her community continued to rally around her family. The church organized a meal train, and old friends came to share memories and laughter. Darizia's teachers offered flexible deadlines, understanding that her brilliance was being tested by life's rawest lessons. Even Miss Evelyn, now frail herself, visited daily, reminding the Dion children of the network of enduring support that their mother had quietly built throughout her life. One humid afternoon, a group of former neighbors surprised Dorothy with an impromptu celebration. They shared testimonies, poems, and gospel songs, each person dissecting the ways Dorothy's sacrifices had changed them. Jamar recorded snippets of the event, planning to create a digital scrapbook, something to remind Darija, and maybe one day his own children, that their grandmother had lived a life that mattered. As the days passed, Dorothy began to drift comfortably between wakefulness and dreams. Her children remained her anchors, and even through the haze of medication, she found gentle moments of clarity, telling Jamar to keep playing music that makes your soul dance, advising Darija to write as if you'll be read by the world, and reminding them both that forgiveness was the key to unlocking generations of pain. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Dorothy shared one final, vivid memory with her children. "When you were little," she told them softly, "I'd rock you and whisper all the hopes I had for you. My dreams were never about riches, but about kindness, strength, joy, a life free from the chains that held me down." Her words washed over them like a benediction. Darija wrote down every sentence, vowing to one day share this moment in her writing, so that her mother's philosophy would live on. Word began to spread beyond their block. Dorothy's story, sometimes shared as an inspiration, sometimes as a cautionary tale, encouraged a local reporter to write a feature about her in the Sunday newspaper. In it, the journalist described how one woman's courage had rippled outward, fueling change not only for her children, but for countless others. Former teachers, church members, even co-workers from jobs Dorothy had held decades prior, wrote letters of appreciation. Some shared their own struggles. Others simply wanted to thank Dorothy for showing what real strength looked like. For once, Dorothy saw herself reflected in these letters, not just as a woman who endured, but as a matriarch whose sacrifices had blossomed into something enduring and beautiful. As summer approached, the Dion apartment was filled with the aroma of familiar foods and the hum of quiet, loving conversation. Family friends who had moved away returned to pay their respects, crediting Dorothy for advice that had shaped their own life journeys. Some brought photographs, others brought gifts, simple things like hand-knitted shawls or framed poems, tokens of reverence for a woman whose life had touched so many in unseen ways. Jamar and Deracia, though weighed down by impending loss, carried themselves with the dignity that their mother instilled. Jamar applied to graduate programs, hoping to pair his athletic background with a master's in education. He wanted to start a mentoring program for young men in Birmingham, sharing not just his mother's lessons, but practical skills for overcoming poverty and systemic barriers. Deracia, meanwhile, began her first summer internship with a local newspaper. Her prose, once confined to journals and spiral notebooks, now reaching a wider audience. She published an op-ed about her mother's impact, and letters poured in from strangers, encouraging Deracia to keep writing, to tell the stories so often left behind. For Dorothy, these signs of her children's success were medicine stronger than anything a doctor could prescribe. Watching her children bloom, she whispered, "This is what it was all for." Not the sorrows, but the soaring, knowing that one day you'll help someone else soar, too. Deracia crawled into bed with her mother that night, both silently grieving the time they had left, both feeling the weight and glory of all Dorothy had built. Dorothy Dion passed away on a gentle Sunday afternoon. Her family gathered close, the room awash in sunlight and gospel hymns. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, stories, and promises. Her final words, simple yet profound, served as a final blessing. Love each other. Never forget where you come from, and never let the world tell you who you are. Her funeral was a true reflection of her spirit. Standing room only, neighbors and family overflowing into the churchyard, the music echoing with reverence and hope. Former employers, lifelong friends, and those she'd helped in tiny, private ways told stories of Dorothy's generosity. One man recalled how, during a hard winter, Dorothy had delivered warm meals to his porch, even though she barely had enough herself. Another spoke of how Dorothy always made people feel seen, no matter their circumstances. The pastor, voice trembling, said her legacy wasn't built on money or things. It was built on love, on sacrifice, on the quiet courage that changes the world from the inside out. Afterward, back at the apartment that had been the crucible of their family's story, Jamar and Deracia sat together, leafing through old letters and photographs, now acutely aware of the vastness of their mother's impact. Pain lingered, but so did a rare and indestructible hope. As night settled, they made a mutual vow to continue Dorothy's work, not only building their own futures, but becoming anchors and allies for others, carrying the torch for a new generation shaped by the deep, invisible work of a loving, brave mother. The world didn't stop turning because Dorothy Dion was gone. But for those who loved her, the air itself seemed changed. Through the months that followed, her memory did not simply linger. It pulsed, vibrant, guiding, like the steady glow of a lantern that refused to go out. In small ways and large, the lessons she left behind continued to shape lives. Jamar carried his mother's voice with him into his adult life, every word an invisible push through moments of doubt or exhaustion. At his first mentoring program session, he caught himself echoing her lines. "You are worth more than what the world claims for you." When you persevere, you inspire others, sometimes without even knowing it. Watching young men listen, faces opening with cautious hope, he saw, with new clarity, the profound chain reaction set in motion by one brave woman's resilience. Dorecia's writing blossomed, each story reaching farther, each article carrying the rhythm of Dorothy's compassion and quiet boldness. Whenever she received correspondence, fan mail, requests for guidance, tearful thanks from strangers who saw their own mothers in Dorothy, she would smile, her pen moving faster, her faith deepening. She volunteered at women's shelters, founded a storytelling circle for youth, and hosted workshops about honoring the invisible work mothers do. Long after the world had moved on, Dorothy's wisdom lit the halls where Dorecia read from her debut novel, a story braiding heartbreak and triumph, modeled explicitly on the life that had made hers possible. The Dion apartment, much the same and yet utterly changed, remained a gathering place, now one of laughter and deliberate remembrance. On every birthday and Mother's Day, Jamar and Dorecia came together over Dorothy's old recipes, laughter and tears, blending like the flavors of their favorite pies. They admired the garland of paper flowers Dorecia had made for her mother's sickbed, now encircling a faded photograph by the window. Friends and neighbors still stopped by, leaving notes and stories on the doorstep, a living testament to the ripples one strong spirit can send across a lifetime. In time, Jamar married, and his own daughter, skipping to kindergarten with her father's determined steps and her grandmother's gentle smile, asked about the lady in the picture. He knelt beside her and uncovered the stories. How Dorothy had loved without fear. How she had kept her children warm when the world felt cold. How each sacrifice was a seed sown deep, bearing fruit they now shared with others. Dorceia, too, told of her mother. At book signings, she read passages describing Dorothy's hands, hands worn and graceful, hands that mended, soothed, disciplined, and held the world up for her children. Strangers listened, sometimes weeping, sometimes grateful, recognizing their own heartaches and courage reflected back. Dorothy was no longer simply a mother or neighbor. She had become a mirror for 1,000 hidden heroines. The legacy endured, not because Dorothy's life was without pain, but because it was full of meaning. Every meal shared, Every lesson taught, every hope whispered against the dark, became a building block for the generations that followed. Jamar and Derazia, and all whose lives she touched, became carriers of her flame, lighting their own way, and in the process, revealing the brilliance of all those who carry the world, quietly, without applause. At its deepest lair, Dorothy's story isn't just about surviving poverty, loss, or even the invisibility that presses down on too many mothers. It is about the transformative, generational power of love and the echoes of courage in even the smallest acts of care. Lessons bloom. It speaks to the unseen hands steadying families, the invisible work that becomes the foundation of every achievement, the unforgiving cost of selflessness, and the timeless truth that real legacy is measured not in things, but in lives elevated and hearts made braver. Dorothy's journey reminds us that within each act of sacrifice, each skipped meal, each sewn shoe, each bedtime story after midnight, lies the possibility to break and remake the future. For every Dorothy who gives, for every child who remembers, hope endures. Even when the world fails to notice, even when the hand-me-downs and sleepless nights seem endless, something radiant and lasting is being built out of sight. A legacy of love that quietly and without fail changes everything.